4 square millimeters. That's the size of the chip nobody has ever actually found, on a story that took down a company's stock in a single afternoon. October 4th, 2018. Bloomberg drops a story that stops the entire hardware industry cold. Chinese subcontractors working inside a factory in Shenzhen had allegedly soldered a tiny microchip onto Supermicro server motherboards, smaller than a grain of rice, sitting right on the BMC bus, the management controller that runs the board independently of whatever operating system you think is in charge. Servers built on that board reportedly ended up inside the CIA, the Department of Defense, Apple, Amazon, more than 30 companies in total. And this is where it gets strange. Nobody has ever produced one. Not the government, not independent researchers, not a single compromised board pulled out of Iraq. Apple denied it outright. Amazon denied it outright. Supermicro's own investigation found nothing. And Bloomberg never retracted the story, standing behind 17 anonymous sources while the company's stock cratered 35% in a day. And then it just sat there, unresolved for 8 years and counting. Think about what that actually means. Either the biggest hardware supply chain compromise in recorded history was quietly caught and buried before anyone could verify it, or 17 sources fed one of the most trusted newsrooms on Earth a story that was wrong from the start. There is no comfortable third option. Whichever one is true, the fact that we still can't tell you which one is the real story here. Not every attack needs malware. Sometimes it just needs a truck route. The NSA ran a division called Tailored Access Operations, and part of their job was intercepting hardware while it was still in transit. A Cisco router leaves a factory in San Jose. It flies to Frankfurt. It gets loaded onto a truck headed for a customer in Berlin. Somewhere in that chain, a TAO team opens the box, fits it with a tiny radio transceiver, reseals the packaging, and sends it on its way. The router arrives on schedule. It boots. It works exactly like it's supposed to, and every packet running through it is now also broadcasting on a covert channel the NSA can listen to from outside the building. We only know the scope of this because of Edward Snowden. December 2013, the full TAO toolkit leaks. A USB implant hidden inside the connector shell. A hard drive firmware implant that quietly rewrites specific sectors as they're written. A modified serial cable. A server chassis rigged to tap the internal wiring. Cisco later confirmed the radio technique was real, not theoretical. The target list included the United Nations, the EU, Germany, Brazil, Japan. And the part that should actually bother you is this. Nobody thinks this stopped. It just went deeper undercover because there's no agency whose job it is to audit a FedEx truck. Somewhere inside the chip powering whatever you're watching this on, there's a second computer you were never given the keys to. It's called the Intel Management Engine, and it isn't a metaphor. It's a real independent processor running its own operating system, with its own network access and its own direct line into memory, built into every modern Intel chipset. It boots before your machine does. It keeps running after you shut down. It can see what you type and what crosses your network. And it does all of this completely outside the reach of your operating system. Reinstalling Windows doesn't touch it. Wiping the drive doesn't touch it. Your antivirus has never even seen it because it isn't allowed to. Intel built it for enterprise remote management, and the trade-off nobody voted on was handing a closed, unauditable coprocessor a standing invitation into everything. In 2017, researchers at Positive Technologies cracked open part of the firmware and found a flaw that let an attacker take over a provisioned machine with zero authentication. No password, nothing. Intel patched the hole. The architecture underneath it never changed. It's still there. Security researchers call it Ring -3. The one layer even the operating system itself can't see into, let alone control. Black Hat, Las Vegas, July 2014. 2 researchers plug an ordinary-looking USB flash drive into a laptop, and the laptop doesn't see a flash drive. It sees a keyboard. The keyboard starts typing on its own, faster than any human could, and within seconds the machine is compromised. The drive cost about $10. Nothing on it was hacked in the unusual sense. The researchers had simply rewritten the firmware on its controller chip, the tiny part that tells your computer what kind of device just plugged in. That's the whole vulnerability. USB was built on the assumption that a device will honestly report what it is, and that assumption turned out to be optional. Reformatting the drive changes nothing because the compromise never touched the storage. It lives in the controller. Your antivirus never sees it because there's no file to scan. And once researchers proved it worked, the implications got ugly fast. Any USB device, a flash drive, a keyboard, a charging cable, can be silently weaponized before it ever reaches you. In 2016, researchers at the University of Illinois dropped 300 infected USB drives around a college campus as a test. Almost every single one got plugged into a computer within 6 minutes. The industry added some protections after that. The underlying flaw that the plug can lie about what's on the other end is still sitting inside nearly every USB port on Earth. The radar system of an F-15 fighter jet was running on parts pulled out of the trash. That's not a metaphor either. A U.S. Senate investigation found counterfeit integrated circuits inside the jet's radar, chips that had been harvested from discarded electronics, cleaned up, remarked as new, and funneled into the military supply chain through unauthorized distributors. Nobody was watching closely enough. The Senate's own estimate put it at over 1 million counterfeit components inside U.S. military hardware. Industry-wide, the counterfeit component problem is valued at around $100 billion a year. A recycled chip that simply fails mid-flight is bad, but at least it's an accident. A recycled chip deliberately tampered with before it got resold is a different kind of problem entirely. And the same shadow supply chain moving e-waste through the back door is perfectly capable of moving something worse through it. The Pentagon's answer was a program to vet a short list of trusted fabrication plants. But that only covers where a chip gets made. The gap between the factory and the assembly line is still wide open. Every fast processor built for over 2 decades was hiding the same flaw. And it wasn't a mistake. It was the plan working exactly as designed. Back in the 1990s, Intel introduced speculative execution, a shortcut where the chip guesses which way a program is about to branch and starts running those instructions before it knows the answer. Guess wrong and the results get thrown out. Except the cache doesn't get cleaned up the same way. And that leftover trace is enough to reconstruct data that never should have left the chip. January 2018, 2 papers, Meltdown and Spectre, land at the same time and confirm that nearly every processor made by Intel, AMD, and ARM for the past 20+ years carries this same weakness. One lets an ordinary program peek into memory it's never allowed to touch. The other tricks the chip's own branch predictor into leaking data from a completely different process. Cloud providers rebooted their entire fleets overnight. The patches that followed cost some systems up to 30% of their performance. Just to plug a hole that was never really a bug. It was the direct cost of chasing raw speed for 23 straight years. And it isn't finished. New variants keep surfacing years later, because you can't patch away a flaw that's built into the architecture itself. You can only replace it. 6 different attacks, 6 completely different points in the chain. The factory floor, the delivery truck, the chip itself, the plug in your hand, the parts bin, the processor's own instinct to guess ahead. And every single one worked for the exact same reason. Something in that chain was trusted to be exactly what it claimed to be, and nobody checked. So, the next time a piece of hardware boots up clean and passes a visual inspection, ask yourself what the inspection actually proved. Because right now, the honest answer is not much.